Hello, everyone. My name is Immanuel Kim. I am the Korea Foundation Kim-Renaud Associate Professor of Korean Literature and Culture Studies in the East Asian Languages and Literatures Department at the George Washington University. That is my official title. And I want to thank you for joining me as I share with you a couple of my publications that came out just, I believe, in April. And to help me facilitate this and moderate this, there's a good friend of mine, Professor Kim Dong-un, all the way from University of Oregon, and I'm so glad he is the one who is helping moderate this talk because he too is a specialist in North Korean film. He will say that he's not, but I believe he is, and he's seen tons of North Korean film, and I believe he's also writing about it. So I find him to be the perfect moderator for this talk. And I suppose I'll just go ahead and begin my talk. I will share with you two of my books that came out this year. And so I will share the screen here. I hope everyone could see this. All right, so today's talk is titled Life and Culture in North Korea. I will go through two of my books and then we'll do some conversation with Professor Kim, and after that we will open it up. I'm sure many of you have questions about North Korea, North Korean culture that I won't be able to cover in my talk. So if you have any questions regarding the life and culture in North Korea in general, please feel free to ask. All right, so the novel that I translated is called Friend. In Korean, it's called Put, or in North Korean, it's called Put. And it's by a very renowned author by the name of Baek Nam-yong. He was born in 1948 from the province of Hamgyong. And before he became a writer, he worked as a factory worker for, I believe, 20 years until he started writing stories on the side. His stories got published in a local newspaper. He joined the writers' union in his province. And then he attended Kim-Il-sung University. And because he was in the north side of North Korea, he couldn't travel all the way down to Pyongyang at the time. So he did a long distance learning, which is interesting in North Korea, that there is this opportunity for students to do long distance learning for those who can't be physically in Pyongyang. So he did this for many years. He graduated from Kim-Il-sung University with a degree in Korean literature. And then he started writing. And then he really got noticed by the writers' union in Pyongyang. And so they invited him, and he moved down with his family. And he officially began writing in the writers' union. And he published Friend in 1988. He's published many short stories. And after he published Friend in 1988, he became really well known and popular in North Korea. And then he joined a group called the April 15th Literary Production Unit, which is a subset of the Writers' Union. And these are select few. These are handpicked writers from the Writers' Union who pretty much write only about the leaders in North Korea. Then what about Baek's previous short stories and novels? Well, he mentions the party once in a while, but he's never really mentioned the leaders. But once he joined the April 15th Literary Production Unit, that is when he started writing novels about the leaders. And by that, I mean, they take a short moment in the leaders' lives, a significant moment, and they write a novel about it, right? They novelize it, they fictionalize it. A lot of the characters in the novels are real characters, of course, but there's a little bit of drama added, and there's a little bit of literary, artistic nature that's included in it. So that's really basically what the writers of that subset do. And he is still part of that group, and he is still writing at this moment. And I met him in 2015, and we spent 3 days together talking about not only Friend, but other novels that he's written as well. What about the international popularity of Friend? Well, as I mentioned, it was first published in Pyongyang in 1988, and it was widely popular. And then a few scholars found Friend in the National Library in South Korea. But because there was a prohibition on North Korean material, such as literature, pamphlets, any of Kim Il-sung's writings, essays, it was during a time in the late 80s where, yes, Korea was moving toward democracy, but still any possession of North Korean material was prohibited, and there's a possibility of being imprisoned. So scholars carefully tread when they deal with North Korean literature. But they found Friend. They thought it was completely different from previous novels and short stories that they've read. And they really wanted to reprint this, republish this in Seoul. And they did in 1992. Unfortunately, the publishing house, Salimto, was raided by the police, and they had to stop publication, according to some of the scholars who were involved with the republishing of Friend. And then in 2011, a Korean scholar by the name of Patrick Marouz translated Friend into French as Des Amis. And according to the Le Monde review, Friend was widely popular in France and Paris as well. And then, of course, 2020, I translated Friend, and it was published by Columbia University Press. And I received, after it was published in 2020, I started receiving a lot of email from various translators saying that they would like to translate it into their own language. And currently, I know of 2 languages, Spanish and Russian. That is, Friend is currently being translated by translators into Spanish and Russian. So that is sort of the international fame of Friend, and it is unique compared to some of the other novels in North Korea. And what makes Friend unique is many facets, right? So number one, it talks about a very sensitive topic of divorce, which isn't readily talked about in North Korean literature. I think I came across maybe 3 or 4 novels and short stories that actually deal with divorce. But in general, it's always a passing remark or an afterthought by the characters. It's not actually a theme in a novel. But Friend, the central theme is divorce. The other thing that makes Friend very interesting and appealing to a lot of readers outside of North Korea is a strong female character who challenges the patriarchal social norms in North Korea. And that is very refreshing to read. Because if you read a lot of North Korean short stories or novels, you'll find that generally the hero is based around a man who is driven by the party or his commitment to the party. And the whole family, his wife, children, are sort of marginalized. But then by the 80s, we see a lot of female characters retaliating, challenging their husband, maybe a local official. And that's exactly what Friend does. The third aspect of Friend that's really interesting is a really rounded character. So instead of having that gung-ho flat character, the revolutionary whose mindset is only on the party and the country and the leader and only wants to do good. In Friend, we see a more multifaceted characterization. And that's refreshing to read as well. Not only that, these characters are relatable, despite the fact that they are sort of depicted as North Korean characters. You wouldn't really think that when you read Friend. And so because of these many reasons, I believe that Friend was attractive to North Koreans, to South Koreans, to the French, and hopefully to the English-speaking world as well, and now to the Spanish and Russian-speaking world. So I believe that there's a general appeal because of this more universal idea of family, love, relationships in general, divorce, but also because the characters are so relatable. And the final idea of, or the aspect of a Friend that's really interesting is that it doesn't end the way typical North Korean novels end. And that is, typical North Korean novels typically end as a happy ending. Yes, there was a wife who wanted to divorce her husband and is challenging the state. But if it were a typical North Korean novel, then the woman would realize, oh, the party, the state, her husband is right, is correct, and I should just abide by those rules. No, not Friend. Friend doesn't end that way. And so there's this ambiguity at the end of the novel, which is really enticing, and it leaves it open-ended, which means there could be multiple interpretations and readings of a novel, which isn't really permitted in North Korea. There should be a singular meaning and an understanding to educate the people, but not Friend. But Friend isn't unique in North Korea. I mean, it is unique in the different ideas that I presented to you. Yes, in that respect, it's unique. But I believe the mid-'80s or '80s in general, a lot of the writers were experimenting with different narrative structure. Instead of following the typical formula that the party designed, a lot of Baek Nam-yong's cohort began experimenting with different types of characterization, different types of narrative structure, and different themes. So I find literature in the 1980s to be really exciting. And of course, you could purchase Friend on Amazon even today. So if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it and judge for yourself whether or not Friend is a readable novel. So that was my publication in 2020, I believe April of 2020. And the following month, my second book was published. And this one I deal with North Korean comedy films. I'm just going to do a quick chapter breakdown just to give you an idea of what the book is about. But before that, let me give you sort of the general, if I should say, thesis of my second book. And my argument is that number one, yes, North Koreans have comedy films. It might be a little difficult to wrap your brain around that because all the media images that we have of North Korea is always serious, threatening, starving, and somewhat crazy leadership that, and of course, brainwashed North Koreans who have to cower before the state and that they can't say anything that is impulsive or a joke. They can't even say a joke in North Korea. How dare anyone say a joke in North Korea, right? Because that country is not supposed to laugh. However, if you actually look at from the very beginning of North Korea, right, when the state began in 1948, we see a long history of not only comedy films, but funny stories, jokes. There are many books on jokes, right? And different TV, well, these days there are a lot of TV shows with like sitcom style comedy. Um, North Korea has attempted to do stand-up comedy as well, although that didn't go so well. Um, and what they have generally today is this traveling troupe of comedians who go from village to village, province to province, entertaining the locals there. And very reminiscent of American style vaudeville, where it's not just skits, but they're doing all kinds of acrobatic moves. There are clowns that come out. They sing and they dance. And all these actors are very well-rounded and very talented. So they can handle multiple tasks, like being in a skit and juggling at the same time and so forth. So it's a very vaudeville-like show. And they travel around the country doing that. And during the Arduous March, which was in the mid-1990s, Arduous March was when, as we know, many of the North Koreans were starving, and a lot of their morale was down. These troops would go around and uplift their morale. So we can't deny the fact that North Korea is also a society of laughter. And that is often overlooked when we discuss North Korea. So that's initially my reason for writing the second book, to show the world that North Korea also has a very good sense of humor. Now, a lot of students ask, and a lot of people ask me, are those films funny? That's a hard question to answer, right? Because to be honest with you, I can simply say, well, their comic code is very different from our comic code. Right? That would be a very lazy answer. The truth of the matter is, just because we're American doesn't mean that every American finds every comedy film produced by Hollywood funny, right? Some people find it crass, some people find it disgusting, some people find it just not funny, right? So just because we're American and just because Hollywood produces all these comedy films doesn't mean that all Americans enjoy those comedy films and find it funny, right? Likewise, some North Koreans find these comedy films really funny, some don't, right? It's purely a matter of taste. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Now, do I find all of the North Korean comedy films funny? No, absolutely not. Some of them are just, you kind of have to wonder, really? This falls under the category of comedy? I just don't see that. I could also say it's a very generational thing. So my father, born during the Korean War, and was taught all his life to hate the North Koreans. When I showed him some of these North Korean comedy films, he thought it was absolutely funny. And he likes the 1970s. So he immigrated to the States in the 1970s, but he still remembers a lot of the comedy shows in South Korea of the 1970s. And so when he watched a lot of these comedy films in North Korea that were made in the 1970s, he found those funny. Now, my father doesn't find comedy in South Korea today funny. He doesn't find it funny at all. So again, it's a matter of taste, and it's really hard to pinpoint what is funny, what North Koreans find funny. It's very difficult. But what's interesting is I've spoken to a lot of North Korean defectors and mentioned a lot of the comedy films that I mentioned in my book. And there's a general consensus. Oh, yes, they definitely remember these films. And some find it absolutely funny. But what can't be denied is these comedy films had a huge cultural impact on North Koreans. Whether they liked the film or not, whether they found the films funny or not, was sort of irrelevant. What was relevant is the fact that these films had a huge cultural impact. So much so that after years of defecting from North Korea, that they're still able to remember as soon as I mention either the name of the title of the film or some of the actors, which I will get into in a minute. So in order to understand North Korean culture as a whole, it's important to look at all facets, of course. And I just find that we have to look at North Korean comedy films as well to understand how much these films have impacted the film industry in North Korea and the people. So my first chapter is comedian comedy, uh, which was somewhat of a movement, I guess, in the 1960s and 70s regarding bringing in famous actors that everyone knows, and they basically play themselves. They appear in the movie as themselves, not as a character, but as themselves. And the viewing audience watches this and laughs at it because it's funny to see the actual actor appear and make a cameo in the film. And of course, we have that tradition still happening today. Occasionally, when there might be a sitcom and it's a fictional world, the sitcom is a fictional world. However, a famous actor would come in as himself or as herself, and it's always funny to see that. And my point in comedian comedy, the chapter 1, is to show that there's a deep culture in North Korean film industry that goes beyond just political ideology and education in these films. That the viewing audience, North Koreans, the filmmakers, and the actors themselves, they're all in it. They all know each other. They all recognize their popularity. And it's fun when they appear on the screen, not as a character, not as a fictional character, but as themselves. So that's always funny to watch. Not only that, oftentimes when here in the United States, when we go watch a film, we say, hey, let's go watch so-and-so film. My friends would ask, well, who's in it? Oh, well, George Clooney's in it, Julia Roberts in it. So we associate a film with character or with actors, and it compels us and motivates us to go watch the film. Well, that's what happens in North Korea as well. It's not that they run into these movie theaters to get a dose of the political ideology for that week. No, they go into these movie theaters to watch their favorite actor and actresses, their favorite comedians, because they recognize that these comedians, well, first of all, they recognize these comedians, and they know that for the next hour and a half or however long the film is, they're going to be entertained. Not only that, they expect certain comedians to perform, right? Whatever they're famous for. So, I mean, to give you an example, like when you go watch a Jim Carrey film, we can expect what Jim Carrey will do on the screen. And that's exactly what North Korean comedians do as well. So the people walk in knowing this comedian, and they expect the comedian to perform whatever he or she does on screen. So the first chapter is about the culture of the film industry and its relation to what the people expect from the film industry and the actors. Chapter 2, I Spy a Spy, is a parody of spy films. And there are a lot of spy films in North Korea. And of course, with tons of spy films, there has to be parodies. So the second chapter talks about the parody of this spy film. And what's interesting is that this film is all about misunderstanding. So the main character suspects that there is a spy that infiltrated the factory, but it's all a misunderstanding because the supposed spy turns out to be the future in-law because their kids are going to get married and so forth. You have to watch the film. Unfortunately, a lot of these comedy films do not have subtitles, but I'm working on it. I'm working on getting the subtitles done. So hopefully you'll be able to watch it on YouTube or whatnot. But it's interesting because I realized that North Korea emulates their spy films, not the parody spy film, but their spy films in general, based on James Bond films and what the Soviet Union has produced over the years, what East Germany has produced over the years. In other words, there's a lot of communication between North Korean filmmakers and filmmakers outside of North Korea. And they borrow a lot, they imitate it. Because it's widely popular in the Soviet Union, they believe that that motif or that style of storytelling will work in North Korea, and it certainly has. So there's a famous spy film series called Nameless Heroes. It's a 20-part series, and apparently it's one of Kim Jong-un's favorite films in North Korea. Not only that, according to defectors, when the next part of the series, let's say the 8th part came out in the theaters, so some of the North Korean defectors told me that they had to stand in line, or else they would not be able to enter into the theater because there were just so many people who wanted to watch this film, which is reminiscent of, I remember people standing outside, in tents waiting for the Star Wars films, right? So it's one of those kind of like, really driven by the popularity of the film itself, but the actors themselves as well. Taming of the Chief is one of my favorite ones. So this is how I actually got into North Korean comedy films. And it talks about a widely famous and widely funny film called My Family's Problem. It was so popular that the filmmakers made a 12-part series out of it. And the titles of the 12-part series alone is funny. And so it begins with My Family's Problem, and then it goes into My Next Door Neighbor's Problem, My Upstairs Neighbor's Problem, My Downstairs Neighbor's Problem, and then it goes into like My Sister's Family's Problem, My Brother's Family's Problem, My In-Laws Family's Problem, and it just goes on and on and on. The titles alone are funny. Not only that, the films are funny. And what's interesting about the My Family's Problem series is every comedian you can think of in North Korea at one point appears in this series. So for the audience, it's wonderful to see their favorite comedians appear in these films, but not only famous comedians, but also famous dramatic actors as well. The ones whom you would think that never appear in comedy films, they too appear in the comedy films. So it's really nice to see both the comedy sector and the drama sector coming together on the screen in one film and just entertaining the people. Mind Your Manners is an interesting one. This film was made, it's called A Day at the Amusement Park. This film was made when North Korea's first amusement park was made. And the film was supposed to celebrate the advancement of technology, how wonderful the party has done for the people by building carousels, bumper cars, roller coasters, and whatnot. So that's what the film is actually about. But the narrative in the film itself, if you set the political ideology aside, is absolutely funny. Again, this is a very, one of those miscommunication, misunderstanding, and North Korea uses a lot of that trope because they find it absolutely funny. So for those who are familiar with an American sitcom called Three's Company, it was in the 70s and all the way to the 80s, I believe. Three's Company is all about misunderstanding and miscommunication. And every episode is the same idea. However, it's just absolutely funny because of the comedians in the sitcom. Likewise, Mind Your Manners, The Day at the Amusement Park is all about misunderstanding, confusion, but because they're famous actors and comedians, it's absolutely funny. And the last chapter, Love and Marriage, is about more recent North Korean comedy films, rom-coms, romantic comedy films. And much like Hollywood romantic comedy films, North Korea employs the same narrative structure. So if you watch a North Korean romantic comedy film, you would think that it's very similar to, it's very familiar because it's very similar to Hollywood romantic comedy films. But what's also important about North Korean romantic comedy films is that they bring in the most beautiful, the most handsome actors to play these roles. And so the audience, after watching a romantic comedy film, they want to emulate the male actor. They want to have the same haircut and dress as the female character, and so forth. Right? So this popularity goes beyond just the movie, and it certainly goes beyond the political ideology. So those are the chapters in my second book, and I want to show some of the important figures, actors in North Korea. The one on the very left, his name is Kim Yong-nin. It's a very difficult name to pronounce. But for anyone who's seen or even just briefly watched North Korean films, you might have come across this actor. He is probably hands down the most famous actor, dramatic actor in North Korea. He's appeared in all the classics like Flower Girl, Sea of Blood, and other dramatic films. He usually plays the hero. Right? He hardly plays an evil role. He has a very noble-like persona, and his voice is amazing. Standing next to him is arguably, for me, is the best and the most famous North Korean comedian. And his name is Kim Se-young. And what's interesting is both of them are famous in their own right. Kim Yong-nin as a dramatic actor and Kim Se-young as a comedian. And it's funny to watch them in one frame, in one scene together, representing the two genres. And what I've noticed is a lot of the North Korean comedy films that I enjoy have the Kim Se-young, the comedian, as the main actor, as the main comedian there. And I realized there's a thread across all my chapters and all of the comedy films that I like, and that thread is Kim Se-young. It's because of him that I enjoy North Korean comedy films. And when he's not in it, I feel like there's something missing in the film. Here he is in My Family's Problem. This is where he just became so popular. His title in this film is the post office leader of the post office, something like that. I'm trying to translate it from the Korean. And basically that's how everyone knows him. They may not know his name, but they definitely know his character. And again, this was a 12-part series. And the comedian next to him, Han Gil-myung, plays his wife, and she became widely popular as a result of this film as well. She was popular as a comedian before this film, but her popularity skyrocketed after this film. It's supposed to be Hyun Mi-sun. The comedian on the left, her name is Hyun Mi-sun, and she is also widely popular as a comedian in North Korea. She's appeared in many films, and there is Han Kim-young as well in the same comedy film. So a lot of these comedians, they just appear in the same films over and over again. The one in the middle, her name is Chung Mi-suk. She usually plays the bad sister, bad mother in a lot of these comedy films. So she plays the antagonist. But she's also really famous as well. Son Won-ju is, again, a rising star. It's funny that I say rising star because he's been rising since the 80s. But after Kim Se-young passed away, Son Won-ju really took over that role. And now I would consider Son Won-ju to be very much like the Kim Se-young of today. Now, to some of the good-looking romantic comedy film actors, Kim Chul is recognized as one of the more handsome-looking guys. He appears in a lot of comedy films, but he doesn't have to. He appeared in many other films as well, like Run Joseon Run, and a soccer film that was made in the 70s, I believe. He also appeared in The Sea of Blood. So he doesn't only appear in comedy films, but he's one of those heartthrobs in North Korea. Han Kye-sung always plays this evil mother, right? I don't know if you ever seen her. This film is from Hoon Kim, which was really popular in North Korea, and she plays that evil mother, and she looks like that evil mother, right? So she's always typecasted as that. But she does appear in some North Korean comedy films, and she's surprisingly really funny. Right? So she knows how to play the dual role really well. Kim Young-suk is really famous, right? So she appeared in her rise to fame was in a film series called Nation and Destiny, I believe, right? Doan could correct me later, but she appeared in that film series and became really famous. But she also appears in a lot of comedy films and does quite well. Right? So she's also one of those actors who can go from one genre to another. Lee Young-ho, I would say, is probably one of the most famous heartthrob in North Korea today, right? He's really old now, but in his early days, in the 80s, he played the main role as Hong Gil-dong, which was not only popular in North Korea, but also in the communist bloc as well. And he recently came out in a film called Comrade Kim Goes Flying. He doesn't come out as the main character because he's old now, so he comes out as sort of the more advisory kind of role, right? So he's advising, he's a more paternal figure at this point. But what the filmmakers of that Comrade Kim Goes Flying said was, when Lee Young-ho appeared on the film set, there would be a group of women standing around, yelling at him, catcalling him, right? And saying, oh my God, look over here once, look over here, right? And again, his popularity is that big in North Korea. Alongside him is Kim Renaud. She appeared also in Nation and Destiny. She appeared when she was a teenager in Nation and Destiny, but she also appeared in other films, mostly comedy films. And this was her rise to fame as well. And she also appears in Comrade Kim Goes Flying. Right? So she's much older now, so she didn't take on that main role, but she certainly took on a funny role in Comrade Kim Goes Flying as well. So these are just a few actors in North Korea whom I find to be not only funny, but are, again, culturally significant, who has impacted the North Korean culture and the life. And if you ask North Korean defectors, hey, what did you think about this North Korean comedy film? Or what did you think about this actor or actress? Most likely they'll know, if they're of that period, right? I would say 70s and 80s, right? So I'll stop here, and maybe Dong-hoon can jump in and have this conversation.
Thank you, Immanuel. I was excited to hear about your book. First, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Hoon Kim, and I'm an associate professor of cinema studies at the University of Oregon. I want to thank Dr. Immanuel Kim and everyone at the GW Institute for Korean Studies for having me this afternoon. I was really excited to be part of this fascinating event. Personally, I'm thrilled to be here today because Dr. Immanuel Kim visited University of Oregon to give a talk several years ago, and his lecture was about one of the chapters from this book project. So I believe it was a second chapter, I Spy, Spy, right? So I was elated to hear that the book came out earlier this year, and I was more excited to join this wonderful event. So I want to thank you, everyone. So I want to just ask Immanuel a few several questions, and then we can open up the floor for questions. I already received many questions, and they look very, very intriguing. The first, my question concerns uh, the first chapter from your second book, The Laughing North Koreans, and you open up your book with a chapter that focuses on a star, Kim Se-young. And I was truly excited to learn about this star and all these actors, actresses, and staff members, because almost all their literature on North Korean film, they focus on the film text and their political functions or the state ideologies embedded in them. And we seldom hear about the individuals or figures or players in North Korean industry. So I was really struck by this chapter, and I almost this chapter looks to me as if you're trying to make a statement, like, look, with this book, I'm going to read North Korean cinema beyond the usual focus on political events, personality cult, and the propaganda function. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about this particular chapter and what were you trying to achieve with the chapter? And in a way, I think your effort to introduce all these individuals from North Korean culture is also, you made a similar effort in your first book, right? The Rewriting Revolution, because I think the ultimate star of that book is the Baeknam.
Yep.
Yes, right. So you even talk about your meeting with him in the book. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for that. So for me, I'm not disregarding the political ideology and the educational level in these films. I think that's important because that's really part and parcel of North Korean culture, right? I mean, people do recognize the educational value. They do recognize the political ideology. So I'm not throwing that out, right, altogether. I'm just showing a different aspect of North Korean culture where there's also A, B, and C, right? So there's more to it than just what we know. And as I was looking through all these different journals and newspapers about certain films, um, sometimes they will have like an article written by one of these famous actors. And Kim Se-young, my favorite comedian, wrote at least 4 or 5 different articles in the Journal of Korean Film Journal. And he really gets into not only his early life, because he was born in South Korea. He's technically a South Korean. And he defected to the North during the Korean War. So he was very honest with his upbringing in South Korea, his youth in South Korea, and then of course he talks about his life as an actor in North Korea. And one of the things that really struck me in one of his articles was that although he likes to be known and recognized as a comedian, he always thought of himself as a very serious actor, very committed, very what do you call those actors who take their role very serious? Oh, it's just I'm blanking out here. They really live and eat that character, right? And again, so he thought he was a very serious actor, but then all of the roles that came to him were this kind of like bumbling fool. And so he wrote in this article that he was almost appealing to the public, saying, "Look, take me seriously." And I thought that's absolutely fabulous, right? I mean, we have this actor who's so famous in his own right, and yet he's also very vulnerable in these articles, right? And that is just one example of many actors who write in these journals. And they're very open about their experience as an actor in North Korea. And I just started collecting all these different anecdotes, different journal articles. And I realized, wow, there's a whole culture in North Korea where these actors are very individualized, right? They're talking about themselves. And the people recognize these actors as individuals, not just one bolt in a big, ideological machine, right? So to me, that's really fascinating.
Thank you. I have actually a follow-up question about the stardom because it's just such a fascinating topic, but it has been seldom explored. So in chapter 5, you're coming back to these issues in stardom when you discuss the romantic comedy. And remember, you said you discuss how important it is to use a certain star persona in producing appealing romantic comedies, and you said you argue that uh, not all the popular male stars are will make the cut for romantic comedy, and if you want to be a star for romantic comedy, you have to have a certain look and voice and even sexual appeal.
Yeah.
I wonder you can talk a little bit more about like this importance of star persona in terms of like an interaction between the fans and stars.
Yeah, it's a real good question. And, it's really hard to do any kind of survey work in North Korea, obviously. I would, love to ask North Koreans what they actually thought about these films and sort of the cult following of these actors and actresses, but it's virtually impossible to do that kind of research in North Korea. So, what I have to base it on is, excuse me, what a lot of defectors have told me over the years. So, yeah, I have to make that sort of statement up front so that people don't misunderstand that, I have all these ideas or concepts and understanding of North Korean comedy popularity based on what actual North Koreans feel. It's mainly based on what the defectors say. Okay, so the sex appeal. Yes, if you watch some North Korean comedy rom-com films, the woman might be, the female actress might be really beautiful, but then the male actor is not so handsome, and you're thinking, how did he make the cut? Well, I have no idea how that individual made the cut, but generally, there is a sort of aesthetic in North Korea regarding what they consider to be handsome, what they consider to be beautiful, right? Typically, for women, it's the rounded face, right? And it's the way they move, it's the way they smile, and if you fit that persona, then most likely you'll be cast in one of these rom-com films. Now, that's not always the case because there are some rom-com films where the woman looks very different from your typical North Korean woman. But general idea of beauty in North Korea is the rounded face. For men, it's not so much the kind of Brad Pitt, George Clooney kind of look, but it's definitely the voice, right? There's something about the voice in North Korean men, and as long as you have that, I guess you would make the cut. You don't have to be fit. You don't have to have muscles bulging out. You don't have to have this chiseled BTS kind of look. You don't have to have that, right? And that's not exactly what North Koreans are after, right? There's something else. If a man is big, like hefty, that's also a good sign, right? Because there's sort of that savior type syndrome where, if a man is big, has a deep voice and is very serious, he will be able to take care of his woman. It's that kind of outdated view of what masculinity is. But yeah, the popularity of it is really hard to say, other than, for example, Lee Young-oh, as I showed you earlier, the guy who played Hong Gil-dong, um, he's an interesting case. So he's really good looking. Right? I would admit he's very, very good looking. He also has a good voice, but you know what? He stutters, right? He sort of mumbles his words, right? And that's not really attractive, right? On the big screen, right? You want someone who can be who can enunciate his words quite well. For example, like the dramatic actor Kim Yong-in. This guy, he's very sharp looking, but his voice is very resounding, and he enunciates his words really well, like a very method actor. I was looking for that word earlier. He's a very method actor. But Lee Young-oh, I've seen interviews of him. I've seen, and just generally what people say of him. Yeah, other than his good looks, I'm not sure. So I suppose it's just really his good looks, right? After all, right? So yeah, what North Koreans find popular and sexy is, I don't know. It's sort of it also changes. Yeah.
Fascinating. Oh, I didn't know that he stutters. Never noticed that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
If you watch
so
Comrade
that's
Kim Goes Flying,
okay.
yeah, he mumbles his words, right? And I remember when I was at the University of Oregon and we watched the film. There was a film
Right.
screening of that, right?
Yeah.
I watched and I was like, God, this guy is mumbling so much. And then I went back and I started watching some of the other films that he's in. Very consistent. He just mumbles, right? And I'm thinking, how is that sexy, right? When a guy is mumbling, right? But he's good looking, So mumbling, it's okay.
All right. Got to go back to the film he's in. I just have one more question, and then we can take questions from the audience. So last question is about the comedy. It's often considered as it's about the political aspect of the genre of comedy. Traditionally, comedy has been opened up as the commoners genre or people's genre because the comedy offers social commentary, social criticism, and many of comedy films, literature, or stage plays, they poke fun at the existing social norms. And I think that nature, this political or subversive nature of comedy still continues even today. For example, the stand-up comedy, stand-up comedians, they are not shy from making bold statements, bold comments about the political issues or tackling the volatile or societal problems. So I wonder, do the North Korean film have a similar culture or the social function? What is the expected or perceived the cultural role of North Korean comedy? Or do you think North Korean comedy is subversive enough?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So let's go back to the very beginning. I came across this article in, I believe it is Joseon Munak, which is a Korean literature journal. It's one of the most famous journals out there in North Korea. And there was an article about Aristophanes, a Greek comedian, playwright. And that article was about how Aristophanes was a critical writer who understood the fallacies of society. So Aristophanes was able to draw out, extract some of the problems in society and put that in its place. I thought that was really fascinating. And then there are tons of articles about Charlie Chaplin and George Bernard Shaw and Shakespeare, especially about comedy, Shakespeare, and some of the other European writers who wrote comedy. So I'll take Charlie Chaplin as an example. The North Koreans really enjoy Charlie Chaplin because they find Charlie Chaplin to be a good social critic, someone who's able to comment on the problems of society. And Tramp, the character of the tramp is that persona that looks at the problems of capitalism and so forth, right? So the tramp is a product of capitalist, social class and so forth, right? So of course, North Koreans would love that kind of critique. And modern times, the North Koreans like modern times that Charlie Chaplin was in, because again, it shows this kind of huge capitalist industrialization that neglects and abuses the workers. So it makes a lot of sense that they picked Charlie Chaplin. The point is that North Korean comedy films did not appear out of a vacuum, right? North Koreans didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, we should just make comedy films. No, they borrow and they study European comedy a long time, since the inception of the country, and they construct their comedy films based on what they've researched and studied from other countries. And of course, comedy films are generally social criticism. So then how do the North Koreans apply social criticism into their comedy films? Well, number one, they can criticize anything in their society as long as you don't criticize the leaders and the party. So everything else is fair game. And going back to the My Family's Problem series, a 12-part series, every one of those episodes is a commentary, social criticism against sort of the upper top officials in society. Or it's a criticism of individuals in North Korea who try to go up the social ladder using bribery, for example. So they bring up tons of different kind of social commentary. They make fun of all the different individuals in North Korea who are, part of this system of, bribery, individual fame, laziness. That's a good one. Having ideas of bourgeois, right? This bourgeois mentality, so forth. So there are tons of commentaries to go around, and these comedy films do make fun of them. Now, do they make fun of them enough? No, of course not. For me, I don't think they push the limits enough, right? But then again, considering that we're used to like American comedy films, South Korean comedy films, yeah, I don't think North Koreans push it enough. And I believe if the North Korean regime, the party allows a lot more lenience to these filmmakers, I think there's just so much that the North Korean filmmakers, there's so much that they can make fun of, right? That it's just it's like a time bomb. It's waiting to just explode. But I think we have to give North Korea more time for them to ease and go into making fun of more things.
Right, thank you. This is awesome. I want to, I wish we have more time to talk about this, but we should take some questions from audiences now. I received a great number of questions here. Let's see. Yeah, why not? I mean, yeah, having access to North Korean material always pose some challenges for us scholars working in North Korea. So why not start with this question? This is a very interesting topic. I really want to see all those North Korean films, if at all possible. Any information as to where and how we can get the North Korean movies that will contribute to our better and more objective understanding of North Korean society. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so although there are many films up on YouTube, a lot of the films that I have are not on YouTube.
Mm.
But more importantly, they're not subtitled, and that's really frustrating. So I contacted this office in Pyongyang, and I suggested free labor. Hey, look, I will provide subtitles for a lot of these films,
Wow.
but I just need your permission. And they came back and said, it's a good idea. Thank you, but no thank you. And I was like, what's going on? Like, I'm offering free labor here, right? I mean, of course, for me, the reason I wanted to do it is to use it in my class and teach it. But then after many years, after that exchange, I realized, or I found a lot of these films on YouTube. but it's so frustrating that they're not subtitling it. So I think we have a long way to go. Otherwise, there are vendors who sell these films on DVD. It's just that they're very expensive.
Any libraries in North America have good
Um,
collection of North Korean movies?
yeah, so the GW library has a
GW?
lot. Yeah, because I had them purchase a lot of the North Korean comedy films.
Okay, all right. So next question is about, there are several questions about a friend. And one of them is asking, was the North Korean public or government accepting of Friend, even though it seems to have some progressive themes? What was the reception of
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
novel?
Can you repeat the question?
Was the North Korean public or government accepting of Friend, even though it seems to have some progressive themes?
Oh yeah. So all of the novels and short stories that I discuss in my first book and all of my research is state official literary works. I don't deal with any of like dissident writing or anything that is subversive to the state. No, these are state sanctioned, state approved novels. And my whole argument and my understanding after talking with the author himself is yes, outside of North Korea, our understanding of North Korean literature or any cultural products in North Korea is strictly prohibited, and there are so many constraints, limitations as to what the writer or artists can do. And so everything is just a product of the party, and it's almost like machine stamped produced production, right? So there's that kind of understanding, but no, actually. So that's a misconception of North Korean literature and films in general. While there are stories that have that kind of strict ideology and educational value, or what we would call propaganda, there are a lot more stories that don't do that, right? There's always that educational value, of course, right? But I would say that a lot of the stories that I discuss in my book pretty much does not have that as the only theme in the novel, right? And that you can read other layers in the novel, and that's the beauty of literature, right? That you can look at the multi layers in a novel, and there might be some what we would consider to be subversive acts in the novel. But if you ask any of the North Korean writers, did you intentionally do that? They'll all deny. No, what are you talking about, right? I love the party and so forth. You know, they have to say that, right? But you know, the interpretation is, and the writers know this too in North Korea. The interpretation is up to the readers. It's not up. It's not the responsibility of the writers. They were being good citizens, good employees of the state by writing a story and including some educational value to it and including some political ideology in it. Sure. And they did their job. The interpretation is up to us.
All right. So do you think you can take a couple more questions?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
would love
okay.
to. Yeah.
Okay. I find this question really interesting. In Eastern Europe before 1989, jokes were widely used to create a sense of community of the people, also against the rules, quote unquote, us versus them. And have you encountered a similar situation in North Korea, or what kind of community do jokes create there?
That's a very good question. And I have to be very careful when I talk about jokes. I did mention there are lots of books on jokes, so joke books. But if anyone here in the States or outside of North Korea were to read these joke books, they're very clean, right? Why? Because again, the state is, and the writers union is like looking over and editing these books. So you can't have any dirty jokes. Having said that, there are still a lot of sexual innuendos, right? So, you know, the editors, or what we would call censors, can't pick up on everything, right? So as long as it sounds clean, sure, it'll pass. But the sexual innuendos are still present. But then also a lot of these jokes have a lot to do with the current social climate. So to give you an example, there's one joke that I really like. An obese man goes to see his doctor, And after his checkup, the obese man, the patient says, "Doctor, how do I lose weight? I need to lose weight." So the doctor says, "Okay, well, just do this one exercise and you should be good. Turn your head to the left, turn your head to the right, and repeat." So the patient's like, "What? Turn my head to the left, turn my head to the right, and repeat? How's that? How am I going to lose weight just by doing that little exercise?" And the doctor said, "Well, anytime your mom says, 'Do you want seconds?' say, 'Do this,' right? And you'll lose a lot of weight." And that joke was written during the Arduous March, right? So to me, that's really interesting. How
Wow.
it's a joke
Great.
about food and eating during a national crisis, right? So whoever wrote that joke, I have no idea who wrote that joke, but whoever did, and it's published, it's printed in that book. To me, it's absolutely fascinating how they're taking this social problem, national problem, where hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have starved to death. People are found eating tree bark, grass. I mean, we hear these stories, right? And then there comes this joke about, not eating seconds for dinner. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, there is the official joke, and then there is the unofficial joke. And this is where I have to be careful, because even when I visited North Korea, the North Koreans love to tell some dirty jokes, right? And these are all unofficial, off the record, right? So, yes, the North Koreans definitely have a sense of humor. They definitely have a sense of crass humor as well. Unfortunately, those are not written down, and those are not published by the state. I think you're muted, Dong.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. So it seems like we have Professor Hazel Smith with us, and she has a question about the friend. It's a long question. You can read that question, or I can read it out?
Oh, yes. Oh, Hazel Smith. Oh, good. Yes. Yeah. The topic is a novel, but I am sorry, my friend is not anywhere near the literary level, say, of Master of Margarita. Yeah. I found it unbearably sad, and the literary humanity gifted writer Peck is subordinate to didactic messaging and narrative style. Yeah, I think Brent might be a surprise to the U.S. audience. North Koreans are human, but it would be both familiar and disappointing to any reader that has grown up in other communist countries. Or sure, one issue is what it means for a book to be popular in today, and then okay, no alternative to books, including novels. Okay. Oh, this is a long question. So, for what it's worth, my experience in North Korean storytelling culture is its body and a bit sentimental and incredibly down to earth. Yes, Dr. Smith, thank you. Well, I'm sorry you felt that way about Friend. Yeah, I mean, generally, North Koreans are too sentimental, right? Oh, really sentimental. For those who've seen any North Korean film, wow, being sentimental is part of the formula. The music in the background, right? I mean, you can't miss it, right? Sometimes I have to lower the volume because it's too loud, right? But you're right, Hazel. Absolutely, there is that sense of, I mean, compared to some of the other communist countries, it may not live up to the standards. But it could also be my fault as a translator. So because I'm not a trained translator, I'm going to put the onus on me, right? Is Peck a good writer? I think he is, right? When I read him in the original, I think he's an excellent writer compared to some of his peers. So I don't want to take away too much from Peck. The other thing would be that there is, this trope, literary trope, that all these North Korean writers sort of follow, replicate, repeat. It is a little bit trite. Okay, maybe not little. Maybe it's a lot it's very boring at times. And yeah, Peck uses those tropes as well, unfortunately. But based on some of the other characterizations from other novels, I just find Peck's characters to be much better and well written than some of his other peers. So, yeah.
Thank you. I found your discussion of the reception of Charlie Chaplin in North Korea truly fascinating, and so I have to ask this question: like, are there foreign comedy programs that are shown in North Korea? Where are they from?
No, not that I know of. No.
Just the films?
Well, no. So they don't show Charlie Chaplin to the public.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry if that was confusing. No, these are journal articles about Charlie Chaplin.
I see.
So maybe that person who wrote that article might have seen some of the films, but it's not available to the public. Oh, I'm sorry if there was confusion about that. Generally, North Koreans do not have too much physical comedy also slapstick in their films, right? So Charlie Chaplin is all about slapstick, right? Falling, tripping, and his body movement, his mechanism is very, very funny, right? North Koreans don't do that, right? They don't slap each other. They don't throw pies at each other, right? They don't trip each other. They don't do that. They mostly, their comedy is very kind of subdated, right? It's more word, play on words. It's more of, as I mentioned earlier, miscommunication, misunderstanding, and misrecognition of certain characters. So the story is funny, not so much the actions by the comedians.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. And just one last question. I think we have a time for one more question, and this is question about the general of the film culture. Well, actually, the North Korean films, the circulation of North Korean films across the socialist blocs. The question goes, the word DPRK films shown extensively in other socialist bloc countries?
Oh, so the question is,
Yeah.
are these films shown
In other socialist countries?
Absolutely. So the story is Kim Jong-il, who's supposedly this film buff, made Flower Girl and entered it in one of the international film festivals held in formerly what was known as Yugoslavia. I believe the film festival is still held in the Czech Republic.
It's actually Czechoslovakia.
Sorry, Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia,
You're absolutely right. Czechoslovakia. You're right, because it's still held there right today in the Czech Republic, right? So he entered the film Flower Girl and got honorable mention. And oh man, North Koreans celebrated that, right? Oh, we got honorable mention at one of the world's most renowned film festivals. But basically, the honorable mention was anyone who attended received the award, right? So was Flower Girl that impactful in that film festival? Absolutely not. And according to a lot of the East Germans who were there, they thought, oh my God, North Koreans are still making films that we used to make like 20 years ago, right? What's wrong with these guys? So that was the criticism. And Kim Jong-il knew it, right? He knew that there was a problem with the films that he made. Not what he made, but the films that were made in North Korea. So in the late 70s, he has the South Korean director, Shin Sang-ho, come up and sort of revamp North Korean film industry. And Shin Sang-ho thought this is a big task because, oh my gosh, he watched some of these films and he thought, oh, this is going to be tough, right? But he did so, and he entered a few films into these international film festivals, one with his ex-wife in it as well. It's called Salt, based on Kang Kyung-hae's short story, Salt. And it won a prize, right? And there were some other films that Shin Sang-ho made that that he entered, and they also won prizes. And so Kim Jong-il thought this is good. This is good for North Korean PR, right? After Shin Sang-wook and his ex-wife left and fled the country, a lot of the film directors in North Korea continued with the tradition of what Shin Sang-wook implemented in North Korea. And one of them was Hong Kil-dong. And what's interesting is, before I got into this entire North Korean literature and North Korean film research, when I was doing my master's back in England, there was a student from Bulgaria in my class. And when he found out that I was Korean, he leaned over and he said, "Have you ever seen this film called Hong Kil-dong?" Now, I thought he was referring to the South Korean film of Hong Kil-dong. So I said, yeah, like when I was a kid, right? Like it was made in the 80s, right? So it was like, yeah, sure. When I was a kid, I'm like, of all the South Korean films you could think of, you're going to ask me if I saw Hong Kil-dong? It's a cheesy, terribly made comedy film in South Korea. And then, he was explaining it, and I was thinking, well, that's not the Hong Kil-dong that I saw. And so he was telling me how it was a North Korean film, and it was widely popular in Bulgaria. And so I had no idea that this North Korean film made its way over to Bulgaria and some of the other Eastern Bloc countries. And so later on, I watched the film and then did a little more research and realized, wow, Hong Kil-dong was widely popular, right? So yes, a lot of these films they leave North Korea in attempt to promote good PR about North Korea, but oftentimes unfortunately it gets laughed at, right? So that's really unfortunate, and hopefully as the film industry improves, better films will come out. Just like Comrade Kim Goes Flying, well, that was a decent film. So hopefully more and more of those kind of films will come out.
Great. I learned so much today, Dr. Immanuel Kim, and I thoroughly enjoyed this talk. So probably we have to wrap it up. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for these wonderful questions. And this is a wrap.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Doon. You really helped out a lot, and I'm glad you enjoyed the book. And I know you've seen a lot of these films as well, so it was really good talking to you about this. And again, I want to thank GWIX for hosting this event. I'm always a little embarrassed talking about my own publications, right? But again, I want to thank GWIX for doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.